This is the Rivian display room when we visited back in November 2023. Not very crowded at all, in spite of the fact that it was a weekend. Back then, after all, if one was interested in electric cars, the first stop would be a Tesla dealership. Fast forward to the present day and Rivian showrooms are becoming more crowded. The key factors include the vision of R.J. Scaringe, founder and CEO of Rivian, a slowly but steadily expanding market for EVs, support from investors like Amazon, and notably the decline in Tesla sales. Rivian currently has two models in its fleet, the R1T pickup truck and the R1S SUV. The focus is to extend the range of models to make them self-driving and affordable for the mass market. All of these points and more were addressed by R.J. Scaringe during one of the sessions at the NVIDIA GTC Conference 2025 in San Jose, California. Here is how the company is evolving.
Those vehicles have a hands-free feature for when you're on the highway, you can take your hands off the wheel, the vehicle drives itself. And about 20% of the miles driven in our Gen 2 fleet, the vehicle is driving itself. And so in the next couple of years, we think that's going to grow from 20% to 60, 70%. So it's happening really quickly. But beyond that, it's in every part of our business. So if you think about us building a very large consumer-facing, direct-to-consumer brand, we have to build service infrastructure, which means there's a large diagnostics team, there's a customer service team. We have lots of service technicians. We have hundreds of locations, Rivian locations that do different tasks, whether it be charging, service, sales, distribution. And so the beauty is that we're actually really designing most of it from the beginning, fully contemplating what it can become in a world where you have much better access to information. There's things that you would think about doing manually, you can now automate entirely. And so we're really excited about what that unlocks for us as a business.
Rivian started as a sports car manufacturer, a common step for many electric vehicle startups. These newcomers initially planned to target a niche market to build the brand and revenue, then expand into more mass-market products. For example, Tesla began with the Roadster, and Rimac introduced the Concept One. Lucid Motors did not start with a sport car, but it still targeted a niche market, the very affluent consumers to be specific. But don't take our word for it, take a listen.
It's a very well-trodden path. There is a historical precedent. If you look, when Lexus started, they didn't start with an IS200, they started with an LS400. You start with your high-end model, first Ferrari, V12. Ferrari's a V12 brand. You start where you're going to be, position the brand, you create a brand, the vision for the brand, this icon, this technological tour de force, Lucid Air Dream Edition, and then you make it more affordable. And I just think that is the way for so many products, not just EV.
Though as not expensive as Lucid cars, Rivian too started with an expensive model, but they are now focusing on bringing the same autonomous capabilities to more popular models at a lower price. Let's take a listen.
And so we launched our brand with the R1 product line, which you see on the screen there, and that's a premium flagship product. The average selling price of it is close to $90,000. It's the SUV is the best-selling premium electric SUV in the country, but it's just a relatively small market because there's not a huge number of consumers that are going to spend more than $70,000 on a vehicle. And so our next product, which we call R2, opens that up dramatically with a base price of $45,000. It takes the magic of what is a Rivian at that higher price and puts it into a slightly smaller package, but just it's the coolest vehicle. So we're really excited about that, but we need lots of those. We need our R2 to be successful, and we need 10, 15, 20 other options in order to see penetration of electrification really grow here in the US. Do autonomous features translate across all price points. And so for us today, we went from a high-priced flagship product to something that's going to be starting at $45,000. So still at $45,000, that's much cheaper. Average selling price of a new car in the United States is around $49,000. So it's right in the meat of the middle of the market. But to get to like a $20,000, we have to take a lot of cost out still. And that creates pressure on every system, everything from door handles to tires to perception stack to compute. And so we're focused on delivering that first in a $45,000 car, but the next thing, so we have R2, R3, and then like R4 and R5. Incredibly creative naming we have, but in those future products, we are thinking about how do we get to a product that's in that $20,000-ish price range, $20,000 to $30,000 price range. But that's not something we're even working on today. We're focused on R2 and R3 as it is today. Be exceptional in AI, I think at all price points, and we need to have products in order to drive 100% electrification over the next, I hope 5 to 10 years. We need to have products that exist at price points well under $45,000. I think the other thing that's important to note here is we need choice. And I think customers are going to need not just a Rivian or a Tesla to choose from, but we're going to need other companies with really compelling products and great technology in order to fill out enough demand to support 80 to 90 million vehicles being sold globally every year.
Yeah. Despite Rivian's efforts, the CEO admits that the market for EVs is still moving slowly and it is far behind the transition happening in China. We have presented in previous videos how China created a fast-growing market, starting with a national plan in 2014, and you can watch it at the link above.
In the United States today, when you think about electrification, we're 8% of new vehicle sales are electric. So said differently, 92% of the cars sold in the United States are still combustion powered. And a big driver, we can spend hours talking about.
By the way, 45% in China this year or last year.
So as a reference, crazy. China's at 5 times where we are in the US, 5-6 times. And when you look at what's causing that, you can debate the causality. I think a really significant part of it is there's not a lot of product choice here in the United States. And so if you think about where most vehicle sales are occurring, it's under $50,000. And in that price range, there's to date a handful, that's too generous, 1 or 2 great, highly compelling choices. Of course, one of those being Tesla with the Model 3 and the Model Y. And that's evidenced by the extreme market share concentration you see with Tesla. And while the products are great, if you compare that with the internal combustion world, you have hundreds of choices. And so you have different form factors, different price points, different brands, different feature combinations. And in order for us to see significant EV penetration in the United States, we're going to need a lot more choice. China's stark contrast to the United States, where you see a lot of different choices, a lot of different brands, a tremendous amount of investment. And what's really unique about what's happened in China is I think we've often focused on the cost advantage that exists in China. And I think that that's of note today, but over time that will fade as manufacturing and the industrialization of building vehicles becomes more and more automated. The relative difference in labor will start to fade. And what we're left with is how do the products compare in terms of features and content and which is technology, which is thoughtfulness around how the brand comes together. And that's what's actually really interesting about what's happened in China.
The starting point to produce an electric car that is not always mentioned is the need for a completely new network architecture. This represents one of the major challenges for traditional automakers. Scaringe does give an idea of what a new architecture is made of, but to give the big picture of what he's talking about, we can refer to this slide presented also at the GTC conference by Tata Consulting Services. The architecture of car plans for the car of the future shows a framework where intelligence is built into every layer, from real-time decision-making in digital twins to predictive analytics and adaptive value streams that enable factories to grow smarter, faster and more resilient. Here is how Scaringe explains it.
In the Western world, there's 2 companies, us and Tesla, that have redefined the network architecture. The reason that's so important, ironically, actually goes back to fuel injection systems. So prior to 1960, cars didn't have computers in them. So they were completely analog. And so, the engine was operated with a carburetor and everything was very mechanical. And so the first computer that made its way into the car was actually a computer to run, again, ironically, the fuel injection system. And you wind the clock back 65, 70 years. At that time, that wasn't viewed as a core strength, so that technology was handed to a supplier. So companies like Bosch really grew dramatically with this. And over a period of many decades, more and more systems started to have little computers associated with them. So in the auto industry, these are called ECUs. Electronic control units started to pop up. So you got a set of powered seats. The powered seats came with a little computer. You had a fuel injection system, had a little computer. The HVAC system had a little computer. And in a very organic and non-designed way, we ended up with these horrifically complex and archaic ways of thinking about a network design. So you have a network that's comprised of maybe 100 of these small little computers, all of which are running different sets of software that are all little islands of software, all developed by tier 1, tier 2, and sometimes tier 3 suppliers. And so it's not at all surprising that if you wanted to do an update to a comprehensive set of features, it's an exercise in coordinating amongst many suppliers across separate sets of software, and it's just really, really difficult. And so if you look at a vehicle in a modern sense and say, how would I design a network architecture on a vehicle that's going to have a software-defined experience, you'd say, I want a small number of computers that do a lot of things.
Central compute.
Yeah, so in the most extreme version, you have one computer that does everything. For practical reasons and wiring harnessing reasons, you end up with, in our case, we have 3 what we call zonal computers. There's 2 one in the front right, 1 in the front left, and 1 in the back. And so you massively shrink down the number of computers that are in the vehicle. But to do that, you have to design the computers, you have to build the software stack, and you're doing a lot of the content that used to be owned by suppliers. And so in the West, there's 2 companies that have architectures that are doing that, us and Tesla. In China, there are many.
Yeah.
And I say this all the time, but in order to be truly competitive in AI, and to really leverage AI beyond a very narrow set of features, like let's say self-driving, to rethink the whole experience, you have to have the plumbing right. You have to have a network architecture that promotes a common software architecture. You need to be able to issue updates across the whole platform. And this is really hard when you have a system that's so embedded and built around tier 1, tier 2 suppliers. So everything I just described was the reason we did this very large deal with Volkswagen, was to take this architecture we developed and deploy it within their business.
One way to accelerate market growth is to partner with established car manufacturers, and this is what Rivian has done with Volkswagen. The reason is simple. Traditional car makers don't have the mindset to create an electric autonomous vehicle from scratch. Rivian's CEO was quite explicit on this point.
And so what we're witnessing is traditional car companies trying to figure out how to do technology, and companies like us, very strong in technology, trying to figure out how to build cars at scale.
That's right.
And we're hoping to figure that out really quickly. Awesome. If you imagine yourself inside of a large car company that's maybe 50, 60, maybe 100 years old. There's decades and decades of decisions and organizational structure that have been built around a core set of skills, largely mechanical, so designing engines and designing bodies, that does not matter in the future state. They're like engine design skill is not something that translates to designing compute platforms or designing software. And so these very large businesses have to rethink their own makeup to say, how do we become much more of a software company and much more an electronics company? And it's just the practicalities of trying to convert those large businesses to become that is real. And what exacerbates this challenge is we have the auto industry is a very large supply base that has increasingly had a very messy approach to software, where you have lots of suppliers that have lots of content, they want to hold on to that content, and that content in terms of these little ECUs usually isn't even programmed by the supplier themselves, which is sort of wild. So there's like layers of abstraction. So the OEMs write requirements, they hand to the suppliers take those requirements, reinterpret them, hand them to their suppliers, and their suppliers usually write the software.
Tier 1, Tier 2, Tier 3 just keeps going.
So it's really hard to break the system. And I think being a new entrant, being a new company, provides a clean sheet of clean canvas to do it in to build this totally differently.
Yeah.
You would never architect a business the way that the auto industry has been built from a software and electronics point of view. Now, the thing that makes auto so hard, and I can certainly vouch for this, is we also have to build large mechanical systems. So we're still building, we have to stamp or fabricate bodies, put them together with high dimensional accuracy, manage really complex supply chains. And these are the things traditional car companies have done for a long time and are quite good at.
Partnering with an established car maker from the startup's point of view means acquiring the capabilities to better manage issues that most affect newcomers, such as the supply chain. We learned about this issue first from Elon Musk when, during COVID, he revealed that the shortage of a simple item like a US cable halted the whole production. Rivian went through the same issue and reveals some of the consequences on the balance sheet that are not always mentioned.
About a month later, we launched the SUV, and about a month after that, we launched a commercial van that we developed with Amazon. And that was a lot. Launching any product, particularly something as complex as this, as your first thing, is a really complex endeavor. Doing three at the same time is really, really complex. And then layering on top of that, we were doing it in the middle of COVID. And so the supply chain crisis that we all felt, where it was hard to buy drywall in 2022, we were feeling across. Each vehicle has around 30,000 discrete components, and any single one of those components can stop production. So it can be a single fastener that stops the whole line. And I think one of the things that often gets talked about in ramping up production of something like this, something as complex as this, is what happens to production output when you're short one item. And that's obvious. You don't make as many cars. That hurts you on revenue. It throws off your cost structure. The thing that's less obvious is most of the rest of the parts still come. So when we had shortages on about 2% of the vehicle, which is great. You say, we had 98%. No, the problem is we had 98%. So we had warehouses filling up of parts because of supply relationships. But the thing that's, I think, the hardest about ramping this type of a business is actually the supply chain. You've got so many thousands of parts coming from hundreds of different companies that need to be coordinated perfectly.
Yeah.
And once the system starts going, then it sort of has some internal inertia and momentum. But in the beginning, you get one phone call from one supplier and says, "Hey, we've got an issue. One of our presses is down."
Yeah.
And you're like in your head calculating how many millions of dollars it costs you an hour, and it's a challenge.
As for the future, the Rivian CEO expects changes that will completely revolutionize the experience of making and driving a car. The areas of interest will be data processing, network architecture of car plants, and the role of robots in the factory. Let's take a listen.
I think it's worth also just calling out how much has changed in the last few years. So if we look at the way self-driving, I'll talk about self-driving first because I think that maybe is the most relevant for the conversation. The way self-driving was developed call it the first 10 years of self-driving being a topic, was very rules-based. So you'd have a perception stack, so cameras, at a minimum cameras, but cameras plus perhaps radar, plus perhaps LiDAR, in our case camera plus radar, that sees the world and classifies all the objects that are seen. So that's a car, that's a bike, that's a motorcycle. And then along with those classifications, we attach a vector. So what's the velocity and acceleration of each of those objects? And all those objects are then fed into a planner. And the planner then makes a set of rules-based decisions around what to do. And then the planner then communicates or hands off to execute the controls to essentially tell the vehicle, steer, accelerate, brake, what have you. And that was the way these systems were largely built, including our own. Our Gen 1 vehicle used architecture was a lot like that. About, I guess, 3-4 years ago, we saw this change coming that we're now experiencing, which is an approach of using a much more end-to-end philosophy, where you spend less time in these sequential steps worrying about exactly what each object is classified by, and rather build a large data flywheel, and you train a large offline model that you can then distill down into an online model, the inference platform that's running in the vehicle. And the speed at which we can make progress is remarkable and very different than what was built before, and of course now is very data hungry. But data hungry in terms of the fleet needing to be able to provide useful and valuable data back, and then our ability to consume that data. So as evidenced by NVIDIA's stock price, you were right on both sides of that. So you have both, of course, the GPUs that are necessary for this type of an AI approach. And this approach we've seen play out to an extreme degree with LLMs. And the unique thing about LLMs relative to vehicles is there's a handful of big foundation models being built, but they're all processing a very similar data set. So they have the benefit of being able to crunch the internet. In self-driving, we don't have an internet of usable data. And so the data is something that we generate. It of course, is noisy. We have to find ways to thoughtfully pull out the useful pieces of data. And then we need to run that through our training flywheel. And so, to your point, we work with you on GPUs for offline training. And then in the vehicle, we designed a much higher capability platform with our Gen 2, which has 240 TOPS, which is a lot more than what we launched with on the Orin platform to do all that in-vehicle processing, all the inference, so that the real-time decisioning that's happening is from that platform. Yeah. I don't think anything is impossible. I think it's all just a matter of time. I mean, we didn't talk about it, but it is worth noting. We talked about increasing compute levels, increasing inference from a self-driving point of view. The other thing that's happening is we have incredibly powerful inference platforms that are going to be part of the in-vehicle experience. And what that will really change, it will become so natural to just interact with the vehicle in a normal way, as if it's somebody sitting in the car next to you. So instead of having to be able to type in the address, and figure out like the first half of the address, the vehicle figures out the rest, which is already too much. To just say, I'm hungry. The vehicle will respond back and say, what do you feel like? And you say, I don't know. Yeah. And you can reason your way to a solution in the same way that we've grown accustomed to interacting with, GPT and platforms like that. The vehicle will have that so deeply integrated that the ways of interacting with the car today, which seems so normal, in 5 years, you're going to, I would say emphatically and with deep conviction that I can't imagine a car company existing 10 years from now with the archaic network architectures that exist today, meaning a platform that doesn't really facilitate deep over-the-air updates. It doesn't facilitate deep integration with AI, for which you're coordinating with, maybe 75 to 100 different supplier ECUs to do any sort of deep software changes to the vehicle. I can't envision that still being alive in 10 years. But I also don't know how we're going to get to a place where all the vehicles sold don't have that, because these are skill sets that are not generally present within traditional car companies. The tiered supply base, so the big tier ones that make those ECUs, have like a business school case study and a conflict of interest where they make a lot of money selling a lot of ECUs, these little individual boxes. And the idea of one bigger ECU is highly destructive to the revenue. I mean, to make the point, we launched our vehicle, our Gen 1 vehicle, had 17 in-house ECUs. And we did the ECUs in-house with the full understanding that we were going to consolidate them over time. And that was still maybe a factor of 3 or 4 less than a traditional vehicle. We then got down to 7 ECUs, and it saves thousands of dollars per car. Now, for us, we love that. That's cost savings. If you're on the revenue side of that, if you're a supplier, it's a lot of business lost. It's a much more efficient architecture. So I think the suppliers have a real deep, true conflict of interest that I don't know how that's navigated. And so I look at it and I say, yeah, I do think there's growth opportunity for us, but it's hard to predict how this can play out.
Most of the robots today don't have AI, but they move in predefined path. According to Scaringe, AI and new capabilities to produce reasoning and make decisions in the platform will certainly create a shift in the manufacturing process. Now, humanoid robots might be the first thing that come to mind, but this will not be the case.
Well, I think as you look at robotics, there's many forms of robots. And humanoid is one, and it's of course one that can be easily applied to lots of different things because the world has so much been designed around human form factor. But in particular, as you start to think about industrial applications, We think there's going to be a range of robots that have a much higher level of intelligence versus what we see today, but that have form factors that are conducive and capabilities that are conducive to more efficient operation within a plant. And things as simple as being able to extend in Z, get taller to pick things out, or move rapidly with wheels. So we do think that the role of robotics in manufacturing is going to be extraordinarily, it's going to be an extraordinarily disruptive technology in terms of leveling the cost structure to produce goods. And in an environment where we're seeing increased tariffs or the potential of increased tariffs, I think being able to compete in lower cost labor markets by using increased automation is going to become increasingly important.